If you're American, you learned this story as the heroic birth of freedom, brave patriots throwing off the chains of a tyrannical king. If you're British, let's be honest, you probably learned more about Henry VIII's wives than this little colonial disagreement. But what if everything you think you know is wrong? What if the American Revolution wasn't about tyranny, but about taxes? And what if the British didn't just lose, they barely even noticed? Welcome to the story you never learned in school. This isn't just history, it's a tale of two national identities built on selective memory. By the end of this video, you'll understand why Americans remember a revolution that never quite happened the way they think, and why the British have quietly forgotten one of the most significant events in their imperial history. Let's start with the biggest American myth of all, the idea of the tyrannical king. We all know the story, evil King George III, the mad monarch determined to crush American freedom beneath his royal boot. But the truth is far more interesting. George Washington himself actually admired the British system of government. The real conflict wasn't with the king, but with Parliament. And here is what is really fascinating. Many colonists considered themselves loyal British subjects. Right up until 1776, they weren't trying to create a new nation initially. They were trying to get what they saw as their rights as Englishmen. Now let's talk about the taxes that supposedly started it all. Everyone knows the phrase no taxation without representation, right? But here is what they do teach you in American schools. The average colonist was paying lower taxes than people back in England. Much lower. The famous Stamp Act that everyone gets so worked up about. It would have cost the average colonist about 1 shilling per year, roughly what a laborer earned in 2 hours. So why all the fuss over such a small amount? The real story is about principle, not pennies. The colonists had gotten used to running their own affairs with minimal interference from London. When Britain suddenly started enforcing trade laws and adding new taxes after the French and Indian War, it wasn't the cost that bothered them, it was the precedent. They saw it as Britain treating them like second-class citizens rather than equal members of the empire. But here's where it gets really interesting, the British perspective that nobody talks about. From London's viewpoint, they had just spent a fortune defending the colonies from the French and their Native American allies. The war had doubled Britain's national debt, so asking the colonists to help pay for their own defense seemed perfectly reasonable to Parliament. In fact, many British politicians saw the colonists as ungrateful children who wanted all the benefits of empire without any of the costs. Now let's talk about the war itself, and this is where British memory gets really selective. While Americans learn about every battle and hero, most British people couldn't tell you the first thing about the actual fighting. And there's a reason for that. From Britain's perspective, the American Revolution was just one theater in a global war. While Washington was worrying about Valley Forge, Britain was fighting France, Spain, and the Netherlands simultaneously across the globe. The British Army in America was never their full strength. They simply couldn't afford to send more troops while protecting their other interests. And their commanders? General William Howe, who commanded British forces for most of the war, was more interested in his mistress and partying than in crushing the rebellion. There is a famous story about how he missed a crucial chance to destroy Washington's army because he was too busy attending a party. But the most shocking thing about the British side of the story is how unpopular the war was back home. Famous British politicians like William Pitt openly supported the American cause. Newspapers criticized the government's handling of the war. Ordinary Britons saw it as a waste of blood and treasure. Why were they spending so much money to fight their own cousins across the ocean? This brings us to the final, fascinating irony. The British were almost relieved when they lost. By 1781, the war had become a financial drain with little strategic value. The American colonies weren't the cash cow people imagined. They were actually less profitable than Caribbean sugar islands, like Jamaica. When Cornwallis surrendered at Yorktown, the British Prime Minister literally fell to his knees and shouted, "Oh God, it's all over." But he wasn't mourning. He was relieved. And this is why the British don't remember the revolution like Americans do. For Americans, it's their creation story, the heroic birth of a nation. For the British, it was an expensive, unpopular sideshow in their global empire. While Americans built their national identity around defeating the British simply moved on to other concerns, like building an even larger empire in India and Africa. But the most fascinating legacy might be how both countries remember George III. Americans think of him as a tyrant, but the British remember him as the king who lost America and then went mad. His descent into mental illness actually began during the war years, and many historians believe the stress of losing America contributed to his condition. So the next time you see 4th of July fireworks or hear God Save the King, remember that you're witnessing to different versions of history. Americans remember a revolution against tyranny. That created a new nation. The British remember, well, not much at all, because for them, it was just a costly disagreement with some distant relatives who wanted to leave the family business. The truth is, both countries have created myths that serve their national identities. Americans remember the heroic version that justifies their independence. The British forget the embarrassing details that don't fit their story of imperial glory, but the real history, the complicated, messy, human story of misunderstandings, principles, and global politics, is far more interesting than any myth. If you enjoyed uncovering these hidden truths about the revolution that Americans get wrong, and the British do know, do us a huge favor, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you don't miss our next video where we'll be uncovering more historical secrets that will change how you see the world. And tell us in the comments which side of this story surprised you the most. Were you shocked by the British perspective or by what Americans get wrong about their own revolution?